I hope we don't go back to some of the practices in the past that, Harry and I had to grow up in. And I will do everything I can to make sure we don't regress in that situation.
In this video, we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in modern royal history, when Prince William made the unprecedented decision to ban Queen Camilla from Buckingham Palace after King Charles revealed a secret that shook the entire monarchy to its core. Stay with me until the end, because what happened behind those palace walls is something Britain never expected to witness. And if you want to know how this could change the royal family forever, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss another incredible royal story. Just 5 minutes ago, something happened that stunned everyone across Britain. Queen Camilla was quietly escorted out of Buckingham Palace under heavy security, and according to breaking news from the BBC, the monarchy will never be the same again. It was exactly 9:45 in the morning when black cars left through the back gates of the palace. Inside one of those cars sat Queen Camilla, looking pale and staring straight ahead, refusing to look back at the place she once called home. Reporters tried calling her name, and cameras flashed everywhere, but she didn't say a single word. Just moments later, an official statement appeared on the royal family's website, saying that Queen Camilla would no longer be performing any royal duties until further notice. But here's the shocking part. The statement wasn't signed by King Charles. It was signed by Prince William. Sources inside the palace confirmed that King Charles had confessed to a shocking secret about his wife, something so serious that it shook everyone in the royal family. People who were there described a private meeting at Buckingham Palace the night before. It was tense and dimly lit, with King Charles, Prince William, Princess Catherine, and Camilla herself all present. By the time morning came, palace staff were seen removing Queen Camilla's belongings from her apartments. Palace workers, who are usually calm and professional, looked visibly shaken. One of them said it felt like watching history turn upside down. The king looked completely broken, while Prince William looked determined and ready to take action. As the news spread across London, crowds started gathering outside the palace gates. Some people were holding signs that said, "We stand with the king," and "Truth before tradition." Political leaders and royal experts scrambled to understand what could have caused such a dramatic decision. Because if the reports are true, if King Charles really did reveal what insiders are calling the Queen's secret betrayal, then this might be the most dramatic royal crisis since 1936, when a king gave up his throne. So, what exactly happened that night that Britain was never supposed to hear about? Keep watching, because the truth is more stunning than you could imagine. To understand how massive this situation really is, we need to go back to the evening of October 27th, 2025, when everything quietly started falling apart behind the palace walls. King Charles had just returned from Sandringham the night before. He looked weak but was trying to stay composed. His assistants had arranged a private family meeting in the Green Drawing Room to discuss his recovery and how royal duties would be divided going forward. Everyone thought it would be a simple, routine meeting, just signing some papers and making basic decisions. But what started as a normal formality quickly turned into a serious confrontation. For many months, rumors had been circulating among palace staff about growing tension between Queen Camilla and the younger royals. People working inside the palace whispered that Camilla had become increasingly controlling. She was managing who could see the king, and even limiting the time Prince William and Princess Catherine could spend with him during his illness earlier in the year. One senior palace worker said it was like she had built a wall around the king, and no one could get through unless she allowed it. When King Charles sat down at the long oak table that evening, everyone could feel the tension in the air. Princess Anne and Prince William had privately compared notes and discovered something alarming. There were inconsistencies in the king's health updates, letters that were supposedly signed by Charles, but he later said he never wrote them. Their quiet suspicions turned into real alarm. William politely requested clarification in front of the entire family, gently asking his father if he had actually seen these documents. Charles paused, carefully studied the papers, and finally said something that made everyone's heart stop. "I never approved these words." That was when King Charles did something nobody expected. He stood up, turned toward Camilla, and said softly but firmly, "Tell them the truth." The entire room went completely silent. Camilla tried to speak, but Charles interrupted her. He said, "For months, I've let silence protect us, but the silence has become poison." According to sources who were present, Charles confessed that Camilla had misled him. She had been controlling his correspondence, hiding medical reports, and even preventing William from visiting during a critical stage of his treatment. The revelation completely shattered the calm atmosphere. Princess Catherine covered her mouth in disbelief. Princess Anne closed her eyes. Prince William clenched his jaw, but remained silent. By the time the meeting ended near midnight, King Charles was pale and shaking. He looked at his son and said something incredibly powerful. "Do what I could not." And when dawn came, Prince William did exactly that. The next morning statement announcing that Camilla would no longer undertake royal duties wasn't just a press release. It was the opening line of Britain's newest royal crisis. But how did things get so bad that a king had to confess against his own wife? The first warning signs of this crisis had actually begun long before King Charles made his shocking confession. For people who worked closely with the royal household, the signs were there all along. Subtle, quiet, but impossible to ignore once you knew what to look for. Back in August 2025, whispers about tension between Queen Camilla and the rest of the family started spreading through the palace corridors. It began with routine cancellations, a charity dinner postponed because of scheduling conflicts, a meeting with Prime Minister Keir Starmer quietly rescheduled, and a sudden announcement that the king would continue his recovery in privacy. Those words, "in privacy," became a signal to the staff that something was being hidden from everyone. Behind the scenes, Camilla had grown increasingly protective, even possessive of the king. Staff members later revealed that she frequently intercepted important briefings and filtered correspondence before it could reach him. One palace assistant described her as the gatekeeper of the crown. When senior palace workers questioned this unusual level of control, they were simply reminded that Her Majesty acts in the king's best interest. But not everyone agreed with that explanation. Princess Anne, who is fiercely loyal to her brother but hates any form of dishonesty, began raising quiet alarms. In early September, she confided to a trusted military aide that something didn't add up. She noticed the king's signature on letters he never seemed to remember signing, particularly one addressed to the Foreign Office approving a trade visit he was supposedly too ill to authorize. She said grimly, "He's being managed." At the same time, Prince William and Princess Catherine noticed a growing distance between them and the king. Their regular Sunday phone calls became sporadic, and messages went unanswered. When William tried to visit his father during one of Charles's weaker days at Sandringham, he was told by Camilla's staff that His Majesty is resting and not receiving anyone today. Later, William discovered from a royal physician that the king had actually been awake and alert at that exact time. The rift between them widened even more. By mid-October, Catherine's assistants had quietly begun documenting inconsistencies, statements released to the press that contradicted the king's own words in private letters. It became painfully clear that someone was manipulating public messaging, and all evidence pointed directly to Camilla's communications office. Then came the event that turned suspicion into absolute certainty. On October 18th, a young palace assistant named Lydia Fenton, who was newly transferred to the Queen's household, accidentally overheard a conversation between Camilla and her private secretary. The Queen allegedly said, "We can't let William interfere again. His influence weakens the king. Everything goes through me, understood?" Fenton was so shaken that she recorded a snippet of the conversation on her phone before deleting it out of fear. Days later, she confided in a friend working at Kensington Palace, and within 24 hours, the information reached Prince William's private secretary. An internal review began quietly, without any public notice. As William pieced together all the fragments of information, a disturbing picture emerged of deep dysfunction within the palace. Documents meant for the Privy Council had been altered. Press releases bore the king's signature, but not his actual words. And medical records, though sealed, appeared to have been withheld from the Royal Physicians Committee. It was sabotage through silence, as one aide later described it. When William confronted his father by phone, Charles's voice was heavy with exhaustion. He said, "There are things I don't know anymore, son, and that frightens me." That one sentence, half confession, half cry for help, was the turning point. William immediately contacted Princess Anne and arranged a private meeting at Highgrove. There, over tea and guarded whispers, they agreed that something had to be done before the entire institution fractured. Meanwhile, the public sensed tension without understanding its depth. The media speculated about a communication gap within the palace, while tabloids hinted at a growing frost between Camilla and Catherine. Yet none of them dared print the real truth, that the very machinery of the monarchy was being manipulated from within. As October deepened, insiders began describing the atmosphere inside the palace as eerie. Camilla started avoiding family gatherings. William and Catherine were seen arriving at Windsor unannounced, and in a gesture that raised many eyebrows, Charles's longtime aide, Sir Clive Alderton, abruptly resigned, officially citing personal reasons. But privately, he told friends he was no longer able to protect the king from those around him. By the evening of October 27th, the tension finally snapped completely. Charles summoned everyone: his wife, his son, his daughter, and the Archbishop, for what was intended to be a reconciliation meeting. But as one insider later told The Times, it wasn't a family meeting at all. It was a reckoning, and the next morning, Britain would wake up to find its queen gone, its king silent, and its heirs stepping fully into power. Could you imagine being in that room when the truth finally came out? It was just past 7:08 p.m. on October 27th, 2025, when the great clock above Buckingham Palace struck with a hollow echo. Outside, the lamps were already burning gold through the mist, but inside the palace, a different kind of light was about to expose everything. The cold light of truth. In the green drawing room, a small fire burned weakly in the hearth. The king sat near it with his shoulders slightly hunched, his face looking pale from both illness and exhaustion. Across from him, Queen Camilla stood beside the piano with her arms crossed tightly, as though she were physically holding herself together. Prince William and Princess Catherine stood a few paces away, silent and watchful. Princess Anne leaned against the mantel, her expression composed but ice cold. It all began quietly. Charles looked at the stack of documents on the table. The falsified correspondence, the doctored statements, the missing medical reports. The papers rustled faintly as his trembling hand turned the pages. He murmured, "I should have seen it sooner." Camilla's tone was sharp and almost defensive when she responded, "You're ill, Charles. You needed protection." The public didn't need to see weakness. I did what was necessary. William's voice, calm but cutting, broke through the air like a blade. Necessary to keep your husband from his family? To lie to the country? Camilla's eyes flickered toward him. You don't understand what it means to be a monarch. Appearances are everything. Princess Anne stepped forward, her voice sharp as steel. And now appearances are all that's left. The silence that followed was unbearable for everyone in that room. Finally, King Charles spoke, his voice quivering but steady. There was a time, Camilla, when I believed love could justify everything. But love without honesty is just control dressed in sentiment. He turned to William and said, "Show her." From his jacket, William pulled out a small silver recorder, the one given to him by the young assistant, Lydia Fenton. With a single press of a button, Camilla's own voice filled the room, distorted but unmistakable. We can't let William interfere again. His influence weakens the king. Everything goes through me. Understood. The words hung in the air like smoke. Camilla's face went completely pale, then red. You spied on me, she whispered in shock. William replied calmly, No, you silenced my father. I just listened. For a long moment, Charles said nothing. He simply stared at the fire, his eyes reflecting its dim glow. Then he rose, slower than before, but with a steadiness that seemed to come from years of restraint finally breaking free. Camilla, I asked you to stand beside me, not above me. And I cannot lead a kingdom built on deceit. Tears welled up in her eyes, but he didn't look away. Princess Catherine finally spoke, her tone soft yet firm. Perhaps truth isn't punishment. Perhaps it's mercy. The kind this family has avoided for too long. Princess Anne nodded slightly, her approval silent, but absolutely clear. Then King Charles said the words that would echo through every British headline the next morning. You will withdraw from royal duties immediately. There will be a statement by dawn. Camilla stepped back as if she had been physically struck. And you'll let them decide this? She gestured toward William and Catherine. After all I've done? Charles closed his eyes briefly before responding. That's exactly why. Moments later, the king's private secretary entered with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had been waiting in an adjoining room. The Archbishop's presence made the decision official, moral, even divine in its framing. He said quietly, "His Majesty's will is clear. The monarchy must reflect truth, not conceal it." The rest of the meeting passed in complete silence. The Queen was escorted from the room by her personal aide. In the hallway, her heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound that once signaled elegance but now echoed like a retreat. That night, the palace turned into a hive of frantic motion. Press officers drafted a statement under William's direction. By mutual agreement, Queen Camilla will temporarily step back from royal engagements to allow space for personal reflection. It was the most diplomatic way to describe what had essentially been a dismissal. At 11:30 p.m., King Charles signed the paper himself, his hands shaking but resolute. "It's not vengeance," he said softly to his son. "It's repair." Meanwhile, in the palace courtyard, black sedans lined up under the watchful gaze of security personnel. Staff members quietly carried out boxes labeled "Private Residence Raymill House." No one dared speak. Some curtsied as Camilla passed by, while others turned away. The woman once called the steadfast queen now left the palace not in ceremony, but in silence. By midnight, she was gone. In the early hours of October 28th, a small group remained awake inside the palace. Charles, William, Catherine, and Anne. They sat together in a private parlor, with the weight of the evening still heavy in the air. No one toasted. No one smiled. Finally, Charles whispered, "You've saved the institution, but we've lost a part of ourselves." William replied, "Maybe that's what saving it costs." And as the first light of morning crept across London, the king's confession, the truth that had shattered one marriage and saved a monarchy, was sealed in history. Outside, the Union Jack still flew high above Buckingham Palace. But beneath it, everything had changed. What would you have done if you were in Prince William's position that night? The dawn of October 28, 2025 broke with a cold silver light over Buckingham Palace. Outside its gates, hundreds of onlookers gathered in silence, uncertain and waiting for confirmation of the rumors that had flooded the airwaves through the night. Inside the palace, every corridor buzzed with whispers. The Queen had been removed from duty. The King had confessed a deceit within his own household. And now, Prince William was preparing to face the world with a truth no one expected to hear. At 8:30 a.m., the palace press team issued a single-line notice to all major media outlets. His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales will deliver a public address from Windsor Guildhall at 10 out a.m. There was no mention of the King, no reference to Camilla, no explanation, but everyone understood what it meant. It was the heir's hour, and possibly the final fracture of the monarchy as Britain knew it. Meanwhile, in a quiet room at Sandringham, King Charles sat watching the television coverage. His face looked drawn yet peaceful. He murmured to Princess Anne, who sat beside him, "He's ready." She gave a single nod and replied, "Then let him carry it, Charles. You've done enough." At Windsor Guildhall, the crowd swelled to thousands. Every major network in Britain and across the Commonwealth went live. The building, steeped in royal history, had witnessed marriages, commemorations, even wartime councils. But today, it would become the stage for an unprecedented act of royal accountability. As William entered the chamber, the cameras fell completely silent. Dressed in a dark navy suit with no medals and no fancy regalia, he looked every bit the soldier-turned-leader. Princess Catherine walked a few steps behind him, serene yet steady, her sapphire brooch catching the morning light. William began slowly, his voice calm and his words deliberate. For centuries, this institution has stood as a symbol of duty, service, and truth. But truth means facing not just the glory of our past, but the mistakes we've made within our own walls. He paused, glancing briefly at Catherine, then continued. My father has been open about what transpired, the decisions, the silence, and the suffering that came from it. And today, with his full consent, I am taking steps to restore the integrity that must define our family's service to this nation. The next lines stunned the entire world. Effective immediately, Queen Camilla will no longer reside at Buckingham Palace or represent the crown in any public capacity. The trust between sovereign and consort must reflect the trust between monarch and people, and that trust has been broken. The hall fell completely silent. Then came the unmistakable sound of pens scribbling furiously, cameras clicking rapidly, and a collective gasp echoing across the world. Reporters later described Catherine's quiet nod as William spoke, not triumphant, not vengeful, but deeply solemn. It was as though the entire royal lineage was breathing through her restraint. William continued with conviction. This is not an act of division, but of healing. No crown can stand on deception. The monarchy must heal, and healing begins with truth. Outside the Guildhall, the crowd erupted in applause. Not wild cheers, but a deep, reverent clapping that rolled like thunder across the courtyard. Some people wept openly. One elderly woman waved a Union Jack and whispered, "He's his mother's son." Within minutes, international reactions poured in from around the globe. Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressed the press outside Downing Street, calling the speech a necessary moment of honesty and renewal. Across the Atlantic, President Donald Trump posted online, "William handled it beautifully. Strong leadership, great compassion, tremendous king in the making." In France, President Emmanuel Macron simply wrote, "Dignity is reborn." At Raymil House, Camilla watched the broadcast in complete silence. Her aide said she didn't speak for nearly an hour. Finally, she stood up, turned off the television, and murmured, "It's done, then." One servant later recalled seeing her stare out the window for a long time, her reflection ghostly against the morning fog. Back in Windsor, as William concluded his speech, he added one final note that would come to define his leadership. "We are not above the people we serve. We are accountable to them, in duty, in truth, and in compassion. That is the monarchy my father envisioned, and the one my wife and I will strive to honor." When he finished, the crowd remained silent for a full 10 seconds before breaking into applause that could be heard all across the Guildhall courtyard. At that moment, Britain didn't just see an heir. They saw a king in waiting, one who had just drawn a clear line between the sins of the past and the promise of renewal. And as William and Catherine stepped out into the sunlight together, the wines over Windsor carried a single truth. The crown had survived, but only because it had chosen to be human. Do you think William's speech was the right move for the monarchy's future? The fallout from Prince William's announcement was immediate, swift, emotional, and unlike anything Britain had seen since the days of Princess Diana. Within hours, television stations cancelled their regular programming to replay the Windsor Guildhall address over and over. Newspapers rushed to print special editions, and by nightfall, headlines from London to New York carried the same 4 words: "Camilla has fallen silent." At Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere shifted from chaos to an eerie calm. The Queen's apartments, once bustling with aides, florists, and press staff, now stood completely empty. Boxes of personal belongings labeled "Private Raymil House" were stacked neatly in the loading bay. A single note left by a palace maid read simply, "End of an era." Inside his private study at Sandringham, King Charles watched the aftermath unfold on television. His breathing was shallow, but his eyes, though tired, remained steady as he followed every frame of his son's speech. When the BBC replayed William's powerful words, "The monarchy must heal, and healing begins with truth," Charles whispered to his sister Anne, "He's done what I never could." Anne placed her hand gently on his shoulder and replied, "You gave him the strength too. That's what fathers do, even kings." But not everyone within the royal circle shared that sentiment. Some longtime courtiers quietly expressed concern that William's public firmness had gone too far. "The monarchy runs on discretion, not confessions," one aide muttered to the Telegraph. Yet even they had to admit that the tone of the entire country had changed overnight. The crown had always been wrapped in mystique and secrecy. Now, for the first time in centuries, it had chosen transparency over tradition. Outside the palace, the public's reaction was overwhelming. Thousands gathered near the gates, leaving flowers and handwritten letters addressed not to the king, but to William and Catherine, the people's heirs. One sign written in careful cursive read, "Truth reigns at last." In the political arena, Prime Minister Keir Starmer praised the monarchy's courage to evolve. He proposed a new partnership between the Crown and Parliament, focusing on mental health, transparency, and public accountability, policies inspired directly by William's speech. Across the Atlantic, President Donald Trump described the event on live television as a masterclass in leadership, strong, honest, powerful. Meanwhile, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney noted that the royal transition had reaffirmed the Commonwealth's faith in the stability of the British Crown. As the world reacted with admiration and shock, Camilla remained secluded at her Wiltshire estate, Raymill House. The long drive leading to the property was heavily guarded, but neighbours reported glimpses of her walking alone through the gardens, looking lost and distant. She released a short written statement through her lawyer. "I remain devoted to His Majesty's well-being and wish peace to the family and nation." It was a quiet surrender, dignified perhaps, but undeniably distant. Back in London, Princess Catherine was seen comforting royal staff in the Windsor courtyard. Witnesses described her as calm and graceful, offering reassurance even as flashbulbs followed her every move. She told one footman, "Every change begins in pain, but pain doesn't last forever." That single sentence, later quoted by the BBC, became symbolic of the monarchy's rebirth. Meanwhile, William held a private meeting with the senior advisors and constitutional scholars to discuss the next steps for restoring public trust. It was clear he intended to formalize a new phase of royal operations, more transparent, more personal, and less ceremonial. One historian compared it to a modern Windsor Charter, marking a new beginning for the institution. Still, the emotional cost weighed heavily on everyone involved. King Charles reportedly spent the evening in quiet prayer at his private chapel, while Catherine wrote letters of thanks to organizations that had sent messages of support. Even Princess Anne, stoic as ever, admitted to aides that she hadn't seen the family this honest in 50 years. And so, as night settled across the British Isles, the monarchy stood in rare stillness. It had bared its flaws, faced its deepest wounds, and survived its own reckoning. The crown, once draped in secrecy, now glimmered with fragile transparency, a reminder that even institutions built on power are bound, in the end, by truth. But for all the relief that swept the nation, one question still lingered in the cool, October air. If the monarchy could survive this storm, what storm might come next? How do you think this will change the royal family in the years to come? As the last light of October faded over Windsor, a new kind of stillness settled across. Britain, not the hush of shock, but the quiet of deep reflection. The monarchy, that centuries-old symbol of endurance and tradition, had just faced its most human moment, a confession, a reckoning, and a public act of humility. It wasn't the glittering spectacle of crowns or golden carriages that kept people glued to their screens. It was the raw honesty of a family finally confronting itself after years of silence. For many Britons, the past few days had felt less like a scandal and more like a powerful parable. The image of William standing before the nation, speaking, not as a prince with royal privilege, but as a son protecting his father's legacy, resonated deeply with millions. His decision to remove Camilla from palace life wasn't driven by vengeance or spite, but by something far more powerful, the genuine desire to heal what had been quietly breaking for years. And in that single act, the crown, for all its formality, and centuries of rigid restraint, suddenly felt closer to the people than it ever had before. The lesson was crystal clear. Even within the grandest walls and the most powerful institutions, the hardest truth to face is often the one about ourselves. Whether you wear a crown or carry the weight of an ordinary life, silence can corrode more deeply than any scandal ever could. And when truth finally emerges, however painful and however costly it may be, it doesn't destroy. It purifies. Perhaps that's what made Catherine's quiet grace so moving throughout this entire saga. She never lashed out, never sought the spotlight, and never spoke out of turn. Yet her presence alone reminded the world that true dignity isn't loud or flashy. It's consistent and steady. Watching her stand beside William as he addressed the nation felt like witnessing the evolution of royalty itself. A partnership of equals, leading not by birthright alone, but by genuine example. In many ways, This story isn't just about a royal family far removed from ordinary life. It's about every family, everywhere. It's about the courage required to confront dysfunction head-on, to draw necessary boundaries, and to begin again even when it's painful. How many of us, like Charles, have clung to something broken for the sake of temporary peace? How many have avoided hard conversations until they exploded into something much larger and more damaging? It's uncomfortable, it's messy, but it's also undeniably real. The British monarchy, for all its opulence and grandeur, just reminded the entire world that healing always begins with a single painful truth, no matter how high the cost. And yet, beyond all the tragedy and heartbreak, there lies genuine hope. William's words, "The monarchy must heal, and healing begins with truth," have already become one of the most quoted royal lines of this entire century. It marks a true turning point, not only for the institution itself, but for how the world views leadership in general. Strength no longer means pretending to be perfect or hiding behind walls of secrecy. It means being brave enough to admit when something is fundamentally wrong. For just a moment, imagine what that principle means in our own lives: to face our mistakes honestly, to forgive others when they hurt us, and to forgive ourselves when we fall short. That's the quiet revolution buried inside this royal drama. A powerful reminder that redemption doesn't come from titles, ceremonies, or royal blood, but from the courage to begin again with honesty and humility. As cameras captured William and Catherine walking hand in hand through the Windsor courtyard that evening, with golden light catching the edges of the Union Jack above them, it felt deeply symbolic. The past and future, walking side by side in perfect harmony. One era had ended, not with fanfare or celebration, but with grace and dignity. The other had just begun, with eyes wide open to the challenges ahead. And as the bells of Windsor rang softly through the dusk, the question that lingered wasn't one of scandal or gossip, but of genuine renewal. Could this be the moment the monarchy finally becomes what it was always meant to be? Not a cold fortress of outdated tradition, but a true reflection of truth, compassion, and shared humanity. That answer, perhaps, lies in the days and years to come. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think William did the right thing by taking this unprecedented step? Or should the royal family have protected its secrets in silence to maintain tradition? I'd genuinely love to hear your honest thoughts. Share your opinions in the comments below, and tell me where in the world you're watching from right now. If this story moved you, or made you think differently about leadership and truth, don't forget to smash that like button, share your view in the comments section, and subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into the most powerful, emotional, and untold royal moments shaping our times. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just about the royals living in palaces. It's about what their story teaches all of us. That truth, no matter how painful or difficult to speak, is the only foundation strong enough to carry love, trust, and a better future for everyone. What's your take on this historic moment?